Wonderful. Chris. You know, Paul was on earlier. Valerie. Okay, great. All right, wonderful.
Hi, nice to see you.
Great. So we're going to get started in a couple minutes. We had some other people kind of join in a bit early and then logged off because they realized they were a bit early. So we expect them to come back on in a few minutes.
There we go.
Okay.
Thanks for chatting. Hello, Christopher.
Yeah. Yes, welcome everyone. And please do utilize the chat as well. We'll ask a couple questions in the beginning for people to just kind of enter in some answers as we get started.
All right. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm cooking dinner, so I'm going to turn my video back off.
Yeah, no worries.
You're fine. It's dinner time.
Yeah, exactly. Do your thing. Yeah.
I just barely skated that in right before this.
Yeah. All right. So, you know, waiting for a couple other people to join, but I think now could be a good time to go ahead and get started. One of the things we are committed to is this being from 7 to 8. We know everyone is super busy, and we do want this to also be interactive. I'll start and say a couple things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Shayna to have her introduce herself. I am a cybersecurity expert with a different approach, and I work with companies, and particularly leaders at these companies, to help them think about cybersecurity within their own organization, but also how for them to really think about what does it mean to create a consciously secure workplace. So really engaging the team, really thinking about their data and systems, but also thinking long-term about the future. And with everything that we've been going through right now with COVID-19 and all of these challenges of not just the pandemic itself, but then this kind of rush of people working from home or this kind of move from work to the workplace to working from home, and then also now schools and people homeschooling. It's been a huge challenge for people. And I've been talking with numerous people, just checking in, seeing how they're doing, some clients, some just within our community. And it seemed that this talk or this webinar was something that would be value added to people, parents and teachers alike, just really kind of having this community to talk about concerns that could be important for individuals. And so just want to say that just as the grounding as we kind of enter in this conversation, that this is a safe space, that people can share any thoughts or any concerns that they have, and it would be good to hear them so that we can answer them and address them in a way that is honest and then if we don't have the answer, follow up with you to be able to get that answer to you. Also just want to acknowledge just the challenges that people are going through. I know everyone's in a different situation. I feel like we're collectively going through the 5 stages of grief as like humanity, but that each of us are in our own personal circumstance within ourselves and within our family. And so just wanted to make sure that was honored and respected as well. So within that, I recognize some of the faces and names on the call, so it's wonderful to have you here. And I explain a little bit about myself for those that don't know me. And I just want to briefly introduce Shayna, and I want her to introduce herself. She's an incredible person. We met 3 years ago, and I was immediately taken aback by not only her energy, but just her brilliance, and the way she works with both administrators, but also teachers, really at this intersection of leadership development and emotional intelligence and supporting teachers where they are within school systems. And so, Shana, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you to just introduce you and
Thank you so much. My name is Shayna Renee Hammond, and I'm the founder and CEO of TeachToLead. And like Jessica was saying, we specialize in leadership development and coaching, primarily for school leaders, for educators, as well as nonprofit leaders and corporate leaders who also have a stake in education and want to support in some way. And also, like she was saying, at the intersection, I'm a leadership and life coach. And so really help individuals, especially leaders, really think about first the inner work and the mindset shifts that are necessary for the different stakeholder groups they're leading. And then, of course, getting to the kind of rubber meets the road and how actually do you move through and lead in an equitable way. And so really excited to be here. The other piece about my background that's important, of course, is that I'm a parent. It's probably most important. I'm a mama. Judah and Joelle are my loves. They're 9 and 10. I have a 3rd and 5th grader. So for those of you, and I'm also a former teacher, former principal myself, that's kind of how I came to the leadership development world for school leaders. And I don't know if you're also, for those of you who are, are both educators and parents, something that I've also been kind of managing for myself in terms of like managing grief and managing the different intersections is like managing also the guilt around being, both the gratefulness of being a teacher, but also the guilt of having been a teacher. It's funny, my kids are in 3rd and 5th grade, and I actually taught 3rd and 5th grade. And so there's this also kind of like, should I be doing more, even though they're getting some from their schools? And what should I be doing? What should I not be doing? But excited to get into that a little bit more today. But just know I'm coming into this conversation both as first with my parent hat and of course as my TeachToLead educator hat as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I'll say before we get started too is that we've had 4 different webinars now that have kind of been core security in the workplace and just switching to working from home. This really is about just the reality that we're multidimensional human beings and we need to think about security within our family and within our lives. And that is a true concern right now for people. But with that said, if you do happen to have a question that is immediate that pertains to work, you can feel free to, of course, address that here. One thing that would be great to do is for those of you that are on the call now, just go ahead and put into the chat just what perspective that you're looking at this through. Is it through the eyes of a parent, or are you a teacher, or are you an administrator? I think that could be great for us too as we think about the audience and who's here right now and how we're framing this. We have already gotten requests for the recording of this webinar that we share this, and so which I think is exciting and shows the need of this, but we also really want to make sure that we're really being addressing and the needs of the people on this call as well, and just the interest of the people on this call. Okay, so Associate Head of 3K, PK, let's see, let me put it. Going to open up the chat. Okay. All right. Thanks, Serena. So Associate Head at PK 3 through 9, and then grade school and parent to a 1st grader.
She's wearing the 2 hats. Welcome. You're in great company. Yes.
Okay.
All while cooking. No.
All while cooking.
Great, wonderful. We have an IT specialist responsible for supporting 300 students and about 50 teachers. Fantastic.
Nice.
Fantastic. Yes, great to see this representation as well, for sure. Yes, teacher in California, parent to a 7, a 9, and a 16-year-old. Okay, awesome.
Welcome.
Parent to a 3rd grader and 2 10th graders. And yep, you're an attorney. Okay, wonderful. Love this. Okay, great. All right, so all that is helpful. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So I know that the main topic that we've been talking about, Shayna, this week has just been Zoom. And what are the real security concerns for parents here and also for teachers and administrators, and what should they really be thinking about? And I've read a lot of articles on this, both on the security side and also on the non-security side. And some that say, well, look, this is a big issue, and others that say, no, it's not a big issue, right? If we just, if we're going to get together with our family, then we can just get together with our family and have a good time. And someone were to bomb our Zoom, then is that really a big deal? Well, I think the question here is, well, it depends on how that Zoom is going to be used. So what we do know is that the FBI has issued a warning against using Zoom. In the state of New York, the Attorney General here is doing an investigation into Zoom. So these are pretty serious, serious bodies that are looking into this private company. And so I think that it does warrant a conversation for parents to kind of be aware of what's going on. And I know, Shayna, you also had some interesting thoughts too. Just, okay, well, we also have children that are different ages, right? So, you know, maybe a 16-year-old using it is also very different than a 10-year-old using it. And what does that really look like? And so just to give you guys some of the facts around Zoom, what I can tell you right now is the main areas where we're seeing a lot of this disruption, specifically kind of the Zoom bombing that's taking place or Zoom attacking, really is in the live meetings. So if you happen to have a live webinar that's taking place, meaning this link is public. So one thing that didn't happen with this meeting is that it was held private until 2 hours before the meeting, and then it was sent out. However, if it was considered live, meaning anyone could have registered for it or anyone could have just clicked in on it, then yeah, that could increase the possibility of something like a Zoom bombing taking place. But even within that, there are some key things that you want to do if you're hosting a live meeting. And I think this could be important for teachers that are using Zoom, particularly if you're using a free version of Zoom. And so you want to make sure that you are, as much as possible, not sharing the link. So if it's possible where all the students can go to one place and find the link for the webinar, or for the Zoom link, however you're setting it up for, that would be really great. I know that that's not always easy, but to really make it so it's hard for people to, from anyone who's outside of the group, or particularly the class or the school, to be able to access it would be the ideal thing. The other thing is we want to, as much as possible, be able to limit who comes into the group. So you would want to have the opportunity to admit people to come into the group. And then you would also want to have the opportunity to remove people from the group as well. And Serena, I just saw a chat from you, which is great. So thank you. I do want to take a moment to point out Zoe, who's also on the call. She works with us at PurePoint International, and she's amazing. And she's going to be making sure that we address everything that's coming through the chat, any active questions, things like that. So please do bring them forward. And as they come up, particularly if we're like on this topic right now of Zoom, she will make sure that we hear those questions.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Okay. So the other thing that you want to do is make sure that after kind of having the opportunity to limit who, or personally admit who's coming in and who also is, and then have the opportunity to have someone leave, is you want to be able to control their mic and who can speak and who can't speak. You want to be able to also, as much as possible, have control over video. If someone is doing something appropriate, then you want to be able to have the control to be able to turn someone's video off. And so these are all things that really that you should be able to do. What you may want to do is, if you're not sure how to do this, is Zoom has put together some instructions and some training so that people can learn how to use it and activate some of these tools. But I think that would be an important thing, as just kind of this next step and kind of how we could limit this type of thing from happening. But you know, the truth is that there are a lot of issues with Zoom, a number of things, and personally, I was using Skype last year with a client, and it was their tool. And I remember when we had someone who jumped into the call, and when they jumped into the call, I immediately noticed it. And I flagged it, but then that person immediately jumped out. And so it was hard to imagine how this person got this private link for this meeting for 3 people, but it was a confidential conversation. So it was important that that person wasn't privy to it. But that really goes back to ensuring that you also have those controls over who to admit, and then also being able to remove someone, the paying attention to who's coming in and out. And a lot of times that can be difficult if you're leading the call, but you're also the host. But just something to pay attention to and something to do. I have a colleague who I'm connected with and on Facebook, and we met a couple years ago and we've stayed in touch, and she runs a digital kind of like broadcasting or a really video company for companies. And one of the things that she said is that there are bots that just automatically have been created to do this type of thing. But what we also know is that people are doing this, hackers are doing this, or people with malicious intent are doing these types of things. And it's come up in numerous different ways, from racial slurs to inappropriate pictures to inappropriate comments. And so being able to, when you see something immediately, to be able to stop it is really key. The other thing is, I would say, is as you see with, and I did a couple of things because I wanted to make sure that you guys could see this as the process that we were doing this Zoom, is I saw that someone wrote password in the chat, password protected. So this account is a paid account. And so with this account, it is password protected. So you all were able to authenticate by clicking on the link, and that link with the ID for this Zoom call is what allowed you in. Some of you may have had to enter in the actual password. Some of you may not have, but either way, that was part of this. I don't believe that is a feature of the free account, but it is something that you can use here. So let's stop. Zoe, can you read a couple of the things that are in the chat? Because I do want to make sure we're addressing.
So far there was that, and so you actually answered the password protection question along with a specifically free version, and that versus the paid version for upgrade. Also, if we do all of those limits, but are still getting Zoom bombed, can we not just shut down the call or remove them from the meeting?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I would suggest. I would suggest you could shut down the call and start a new call up, but I would also definitely just remove them from the meeting. Mute them, turn their video off, and then absolutely remove them. That's what I would suggest. Yeah. As much as possible, again, try to limit who has access to that link. I see that, a lot of colleges and universities that, as well are kind of making these links public. I've heard of different things going on with some of the AA groups around the country. It's because a lot of these links are made public. So if there's one place where these links are held so that everyone actually has that's approved or authorized to be part of this meeting is actually coming to the location of this particular link, and then they're clicking on the link, and then the host is admitting them, that's a way to limit this. So I'll give you an example. I was, Yafet Cohen is the young woman I mentioned who I'm friends with, and we're connected on Facebook. We've known each other for a couple of years. For her company, whenever she's hosting a webinar, one of the things that she does, and she'll do this for her Facebook Lives and any YouTube Live she's doing, she has Zoom that's kind of this incubator where if anyone actually wants to speak on any of these lives, they have to actually come to her website, click on a link. They click on a link, and then from there, she knows that this person wants to actually join the verbal conversation, and then she'll admit them in. Other than that, no one can speak on these lives that she's doing on social media. All they can do is comment in the chat. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, and something related that I wondered about and asked Jessica about this. So many of us who wear both hats have children at home on Zoom a lot more than maybe they were beforehand. And then as I'm coaching school leaders and the process of moving from, traditional school as we knew it to now distance learning, many schools sent many children, including my own, home with Chromebooks. And a security question I'd always kind of had it in the back of my mind, and now it's at the forefront now that it's such a big part of our lives, which is how important is it to really cover up the cameras on our devices when we're not around? I've heard conflicting things, read conflicting material about, even when your camera is off, how likely is it? Can someone kind of hack into your computer, maybe see what's going on through your child's device or your device? So would love to hear you speak to that.
Yeah, so no, it's definitely possible. And so it's really important to ensure that you do have a camera over or a cover over your camera. It's something that you could either purchase. It's something that a lot of companies give away for free at different fairs. But to have something like that is critical because at any time your camera can be enabled. And it's also important because particularly if you think about our phones and also our Apple laptops, that there are Macs, or I actually use Windows, but for any of those that use Apple, you have apps that are running all the time. And if you have enabled the camera to be on, that means all someone has to do is get into one of your apps to enable your camera. And then that could give them access, as opposed to, it could be very different if you've turned off camera access to all of your apps and you only turn it on when you're actually using that app. That's very different. So it's something that I definitely recommend, and not just for your laptops, but also for your Chromebooks, your phones as well. So no, thanks for asking. And so a couple other things that I'll say, and just kind of closing on Zoom as well, and this kind of conversation around, is Zoom safe and what should we be doing and how should we be using it? I would say that if the host can enable all of these controls, then yes, you could use it. I really do think that it's fine for you to use it, but enabling these security and privacy controls are important. Now, a couple of things that I've heard that I know have come up with Zoom is one that they may be using privacy in a way that they shouldn't. So for example, if someone puts their email address in, somehow that information is being correlated to LinkedIn or maybe even Facebook. From what I understand, they've turned that part of that whatever tool or AI that they were using for that is turned off. So that's good and that's encouraging. That would be something that I would say is a red flag, but if they've turned it off now, then I think that that's good. If you're someone who is, let's say the Department of Education in the New York City public school system has stated that as of right now, they would prefer that the New York City school system doesn't use Zoom. So I think that's going to be a hard switch. And then particularly if they do make the switch to allow Zoom again. But I know that New York City has their own kind of policies around cybersecurity. So they're looking at it very differently. And I think that the Attorney General in the state of New York is looking at it differently. And then I heard some things around the Department of Defense, that the Department of Defense was using Zoom, and somehow when they were trying to connect, it connected to a broadband in China. Like, well, yeah, like that's a really major concern, right? I mean, I think for anyone, they would say that that's a concern. So maybe the Department of Defense, maybe they're not going to use Zoom. But I do think for our purposes on a kind of a day-to-day basis, as long as we are kind of following some protocols of one, getting familiar with the tool, two, enabling the security and privacy and controls, and three, really learning how to use it so that we can make sure the tool is working right for us. I think that is a way that can really enable us to be safe, but also most importantly, kids to be safe. Yeah.
Ooh, question about Google, security of Zoom versus Google Meet.
Okay. Yeah.
Use.
Yeah. I would say that Google Meet, I would say that on some level it's secure. I think that I would imagine that all tools have their vulnerabilities in some way. And I think it's learning more about what they are. I honestly don't use Google that much for a lot of meetings. So I feel like I can't directly speak to it, but from the surface and just kind of what I've done on looking at certain things is that, and looking at tools across the board, is that it could meet what you're looking for. But if you aren't familiar with how to use it, and if it's not, and all the security controls and privacy controls are enabled, you could end up with some of the same concerns that possibly you were seeing on other platforms, is what I would say to that. And also I would say for the privacy concern as well, that it's possible that, Google may be using that may be taking information and using it for learning purposes, or and seeing and gathering information about the users of the tool. But I actually have been working closer with someone who represents Google Suites. We haven't spent much time talking about Google Hangouts, but she has assured me that they've been working really hard to improve the security of all of their tools because businesses are using them more. So I do feel more, over the year, I've become more confident in that tool within Google. So I can definitely say that.
And there's another question. What are your thoughts about recording Zoom sessions and posting them in a G Suite classroom?
So what I would say is, as much as possible, we would want these to be secure. So if you were to put them in a G Suite area, as long as they are secure, meaning only you and the students can access them, or whoever has the authority to do so, if there are other people. But I think that that's really important. But I think, something I know Shayna and we talked about earlier too, is a lot of times security is only as strong as the users. And we've talked a little bit about that now. But I guess the question that I would have is, how are students also accessing this? Because if whoever's accessing this, meaning if students are doing it through their own logins, but their passwords aren't secure. So if their accounts happen to be hacked, then that could lead to vulnerability of any of these stored recordings or Zoom meetings, however long that they're there, of them being exposed or of them not being stored securely.
Yeah, I think our concern is we're trying to be flexible with family needs and recognizing that not everyone can be available on a live session because maybe mom needs the computer at that time, or your sibling has a session, or whatever it might be. And so the discussion's been around whether or not we could record those sessions, because then the student benefits from the conversation and interaction amongst peers. But then, just as easily a student could access that in their G Suite and take a video with their phone and then post it on social media. There's so much involved in that. I wasn't sure if any of that's come up at all in discussion.
It has not come up, but it does lead to this bigger point around this idea of this shared responsibility model. And it's something that we talk about more in the workplace, that if, security is only as strong as its weakest link, right? And so the question I would have is, and this may or may not be happening at all, but what training is also happening for students on how they should be accessing these tools, what passwords they should be using, what's appropriate use of data and appropriate use of systems and tools, even if it's their own systems and tools, or they may be using an educational school systems tools, but they're maybe using their parents' devices. But what's the appropriate use? So if we were in a corporate setting, when an employee comes on, one of the things that they would sign is an appropriate use of assets. Right? How do I appropriately use these company tools? Well, I promise to make sure that I'm not going on to social media platforms, or I'm making sure that I only use this laptop and this phone for work. I make sure that I'm not sharing personal or confidential information within the organization or company information. There are all of these different things that happen. And I think, I know one of the concerns that I see just from what's happened in this kind of quick transition is that we have students of all ages, and there hasn't been this understanding around what is appropriate. And so I think what you just said could absolutely happen. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. And even in the workplace, end user training, meaning the person who's at the end of that terminal, that computer, training is one of the most important things. So how are we supporting students of all ages around this to ensure that they actually know? Because there could just be this thought where that doesn't even occur to them that it's something that it's inappropriate for them to take information or take a file and make it public. So do you find that this is even, I would love to learn from you if you find that this is a part of conversation within the class.
It definitely is. And we wrote up policies and procedures, but you're dealing with 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and we've already had a 7th grader share a class code with a classmate that, was there last year and left, and he tried to pop in, and the teacher, had the waiting room enabled and didn't let him in until everyone had left. And
Okay.
let him in, and he was staring at the teacher and freaked out and left, you know, but, you know, and that's innocent, but
Yeah.
I think you can put in as much policy as you want, but to your point, it's the integrity of the students using the technology and letting the parents know that if anything goes wrong, it's not because of us, you know?
Right.
So we have calls tomorrow with all of the or offered calls with all of the families via Zoom tomorrow. So I plan to talk about some of the cybersecurity stuff and the importance of students interacting appropriately.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can only manage so much of it, which is the hardest part.
Yeah. No, I would agree as well. And I think it brings up a couple of points, which is what is the role of the parents in this? And what is their responsibility too, particularly if it's their devices technically that are being used. The other thing is, you know, I know that, I know Shayna, I'm sure you have a lot to say on this topic, is there's been so much going on. I mean, for students, to say that they're probably very stressed out is probably an understatement as well. And so, and what does this do to them, and are they even at that age, are they even making some of the best decisions that they could be making if we weren't going through this pandemic, and if they didn't have to make the switch from working to now being homeschooled. And so, so also supporting them as well, I guess, with different resources, and of course to teachers and administrators too, of course, that, I mean, to say the least. So because I also know that many of the teachers and administrators have their own children that they're also working with as well at home. So
right. Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is just kind of to really underscore the training piece. We work with schools and districts all over the country, and the ones that are like really kind of finding their way with how to manage now families in a much more kind of intimate way, as well as students and their staff. It's really those schools who have really already started really thinking about their parents as partners, and now as their students' first teacher. I mean, that couldn't be more true, right? That's the oldest adage, and it's so true. And it's those schools that have scheduled Zoom meetings or, you know, hangout meetings weekly and consistently, and have talked about, so this is how our week went, you know, this is, you know, of course, these are our expectations, but like parents, like, how is it going? We know you're balancing a lot, you know, and our society is not built for us all to parent full-time and work full-time. These are the kinds of things that are coming up. Let's, you know, come around as a community and solve these things together. So I think it's like the same way we kind of have huddles with our staff. It's those schools that are having those same kind of huddles with their families on a consistent basis, are able to kind of get ahead of some of these and then kind of shift behavior in a different way for those hiccups that come up.
Oh, also a question about, do you know if Zoom keeps their own copies of the meetings? That's a good question.
I wondered that too.
Cute. So yeah, from what I understand, we can record them, and they may. I couldn't say for sure if they keep the ones that aren't recorded and how long they keep it. One thing I do feel really, really confident about, though, is that there's really only so much space that they really have, particularly now with all the Zoom meetings that are taking place. So just thinking from a business continuity and disaster recovery standpoint, just not to get technical, but to just, you know, to speak honestly about that. I would say that they're probably not keeping them long, but if you record them, they do keep it for a certain amount of time, and then so you do want to make sure that you download it within that period of time. So that's a good question. Now, I feel like I can't fully answer that 100%, particularly because I think things have been so fluid. And I do think this is one of those areas that have changed a little bit with Zoom, simply because they went there just from last month, from February to March, the amount of people that have started using Zoom, or the downloads from the app, went up over 1,100%. And so when a system even has that type of, that type of increase over time, there's a lot of things that start to challenge the system. And so, Valerie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I do think that there's a couple of things just from a systems process that has definitely changed within Zoom, as they've started to address their cybersecurity and privacy concerns that they've had. But I'll get back to you 100% in regards to that question. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, my kids are in public school in NYC. They say that Zoom and Google were not allowed over the weekend, and 2 days later they were, but they're likely changing to Microsoft. Any assumptions about the changes or differences?
So I think for Microsoft Teams may allow some, it may allow some more, particularly in this particular case, it may allow more security and more use for teams that are already using it in a Windows environment. And so I think that this could make that easier without a doubt. I do think that whether you're using Teams or whether you're using Google or you're using Zoom, the most important thing is, are you familiar with the platform and are you using it the right way? I mentioned earlier that last year I was using Skype, which is also a Microsoft product, and we had someone hop on and hop off. Part of the reason why Microsoft has gone from Skype to Microsoft Teams is because they knew that that was a security vulnerability. And so they have phased out Skype internally within Microsoft, and they have pushed forth Microsoft Teams. So I would say in terms of addressing security issues, I would say Microsoft Teams is a newer product that's out there. It was one of the reasons why it was offered was to really help support collaboration of teams that are not all in the same office, but they were also addressing specific security issues. So I would say that that probably is a secure product, but it's also how we use it. So how are we authenticating to that tool? Are we making sure that where we do have the right passwords and that they're strong enough? Are we ensuring that all the users that are also using that tool, that they're not going to take information that's there and take images or download it off and make that public? And so that's really important as well. And all of those things could also happen with these other platforms.
So I know we've touched on passwords a few times, and Jessica, you and I have talked kind of offline about it, and wondered about passwords in terms of, is it kind of rule of thumb, is best practice to have just kind of one uniform password per, subject area so that everyone's kind of using the same one to log on and off? Should students, at what point, should students kind of have their own password for different pieces of their learning path? From a security standpoint, what would you say is best practice?
Yeah, so when you're developing a password, I would say right now, and even for young people, I know this can be really challenging, but this is why I think training is really important for students, is that even if you are one, I think that there should be at least an 8-digit password that students should be using. And students should not be using the same one for different tools. So if they are, let's say they're logging into Microsoft Teams, and maybe they have other tools that their classes requiring, other tools that their classes are requiring them to use, they should have different passwords for each one of those tools. And when they have this at least 8-digit password, and the reason why I say 8 digits, really I would say 12. I do think 12 would be best, but I'm just gonna say 8 here. Is that for the most part, all the 6-digit passwords for the most part have already been hacked. So if you are, and I would say probably even by the next year, probably all the 8-digit passwords would have been hacked. And so it is important as we really start to think about just the evolution of cybersecurity also, but also the evolution of hacking and where we are when it comes to each of these opportunities, the increased security that's absolutely needed for systems, because once you get to a certain point, there are only a certain number of passwords that can be, with 6 digits or 8 digits. And once they're all hacked, then all someone has to do is, run a certain type of malware or do something, or just run some sort of tool, and now they would be able to get into any system. Frankly, at some point, it may take a while, but at some point they'll eventually get in. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about a password, you want to have a capital letter, a lowercase letter. You want to use some sort of kind of number, alphanumeric number, and I would say an exclamation point or some other symbol that would be a part of that. And that, I think, would be really the best way to have a strong password. And thinking about that, it can be a lot when you're managing, when it's a lot for us as adults to manage multiple passwords, right? So we think about a young person trying to manage multiple passwords. Wow. It's like, what? Right? It's like, please. And so this is why it is important when we think about what does it mean to even live a consciously secure life. To me, it's integrated. It's like, how do we live our life, but also live it here, so that we're thinking about these things more than that we are teaching our children how to do that. And I would say teach my kids how to do 2 billion people online now. Saying the next 7-8 years, we're going to have an additional 3 billion people get online. All that's going to do is increase the amount of complexity and security issues that we have. And so helping to really ensure that young people understand that the true challenges that are existing, but also empower them to know that they could stop this. They can raise a red flag. They can say, hey, this doesn't seem right. Or, you know, it's looked like I thought I saw someone sitting in a meeting that shouldn't have been there. All of these things that we want to teach children and that they're being taught in other areas of their life. It's important for them, I think, of course, I'm an advocate for this, but they're also thinking about it in terms of security. Yeah. So, yeah. So, but that's what those would be my suggestions on thinking about a strong password. Another thing, maybe to make it just a bit easier, could be using a passphrase. So like it could even be something as simple as I love chocolate, but within that you would use numbers, you would use lowercase, uppercase, you would use symbols, and how you're saying and how you're spelling out I love chocolate.
I've never thought about doing it that way.
Yeah.
Using a phrase.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, particularly if it's something that you go into a lot. You know, if you have use like a motivational phrase, like, you know, like, I will master this or something like that, or I will get through this. It's actually quite empowering because
that could be empowering. I really like that. And I clearly need to go back and change a lot of passwords myself. I have too many duplicates. Yeah. But looks like we have a question from Valerie.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. So,
what, if any, security concerns should we be aware of with screen sharing? Is that access limited to just the camera? Can there be a backdoor to the hard drive?
Screen sharing, are you specifically meaning like on Zoom or anywhere?
Yeah. Also, at this point, we're at 7:45, so after this, I guess official Q&A can start. Okay. All right. Thanks, Zoe. I have probably just 1 or 2 more questions also for Shayna too that I think could be interesting. What I would say is with screen sharing, yes, I do always think that's, you always do want to do that in a secure environment. Now, the goal though is particularly when you're in a school setting where teachers are screen sharing with students or students are screen sharing with each other, that we create that secure environment, right? Where students are authenticating to the tool in a secure way, that people feel safe with each other, that there's a certain level of respect there, so that we know that if someone starts screen sharing something, no one else has the ability to start recording. So that would be something that only the host can do. The other thing is that no one is going to pull out a camera and take a picture of it. And so part of that could also just be setting up some rules of engagement. What are the appropriate rules of engagement when we're together as a class and we're screen sharing? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. And Serena, I think it's interesting that you said you have policies and procedures around this, and I'd be curious to know if that was set out, if that was already established, or if that was established over the past couple of weeks. But also, Shayna, I would ask you is, what guidance are schools giving? Do you know if this is even a topic that they're thinking about cybersecurity for students and for teachers? And is this something that's on their mind?
It's so interesting you say that. It varies from, of course, district to district. I would say what's being talked about more explicitly is kind of time and place and appropriateness. And so making sure that, you know, when teachers are giving directions to students, talking about time and place for using video and how to use it and what's appropriate, you know, to go on video, et cetera. And being mindful of, you know, things being recorded and things of that nature. And so when it comes to the more explicit cybersecurity conversation, I hear that more kind of being talked about from a central standpoint. But now I see a need, a huge need. I think everyone's experiencing a need for that conversation to be broadened, because it's hitting at the intersection of all of us. As parents, you know, when you think about parental controls and, you know, we're just all having to look at learning and communicating and connecting through a totally different paradigm. And especially for our little ones, like my 9-year-old, you know, she's teaching me things I didn't know about Zoom, and she's asking me to get on different platforms, and she's learning so fast. And I was, you know, talking to a group of mom friends about, you know, how do we also protect the innocence of our children and make sure that this shift does not invite them to grow up too fast. Because now they have so much access to each other and so much information. And so I hear that conversation more so happening around developmental security, appropriateness, time and place, cameras, you know, can people see, you know, am I making my children more vulnerable at home? Whose responsibility is that? You know, is it on the school? Is it on the home? It's actually on both, right? It's like the shared kind of accountability, shared concern that's happening. And so the kind of guidance we've been giving schools as much as possible, we need to also, and we've needed to do this so many different times, I think this is actually a silver lining of what's happening, is that so many conversations are now happening with diverse stakeholder sets that need to happen. Because sometimes what happens, we all know this in schools, things hit schools and students first sometimes, and then becomes a policy later. And I think the more that we can kind of have different stakeholders, teachers, parents, students in the conversation about security, about time and place, about what's developmentally appropriate, and how do we then bring in the conversation of security and which tools matter the most, I think the better we can kind of get ahead of some things that I'm sure are keeping a lot of us up, all of us up at night thinking about. There are definitely silver linings, but there are things we've never experienced before. And if we can get ahead of them, talk to people who are most proximate, who are experiencing it every single day, connect those with policymakers within their districts, within their schools, I think the better off we'll be on the other end.
And I think, Jessica, to your point of policies and procedures that we've had in place is, you know, it's about teaching them to exist on a digital platform the way that they did in the classroom, which is very different, right? And so we launched our online program with a test week so that everyone could learn how to use the platforms, get used to what it looks like, you know, the executive functioning piece of living online as opposed to living in person, and the parents easing in so that they could figure out their own work-life balance. And, you know, for the kids to get, you know, what I said, their sillies out, right? I mean, they're all of a sudden now they're FaceTiming with their friends all day long, you know, it's a very different thing. And they have to recognize that whatever they're doing in FaceTime, which God help me, I don't want to know, you know, like it can't happen in a classroom setting. And so I think that that's the other piece too, is teaching them to distinguish the difference, you know, almost the same way they speak to their friends differently than they speak to adults, right? The way that they engage with their friends on social media and via FaceTime has to be different than the way that they are engaging, you know, still in school. And there's definitely a learning curve involved in that. And I think, Shayna, to your point too, you know, I tend to be a very screen sensitive parent. It's one of my weird things, right? We all have them. Screens is mine. My child's not on social media. I am, he's not. And so all of a sudden now, right, my no screens during the week is totally out the window.
Right.
And quite frankly, after him learning on a screen all day and me working at 6 o'clock, I'm like, just turn on the television. Like, you know, I mean, you're almost extra exhausted. So, I think that all of that is just so important to consider.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, really great point. Really, really great point. Interesting. Yeah. Zoe, what do we have in the chat as well? I saw some things coming through.
Yeah, so there's a comment, short summary, don't share the meeting ID with more than who you have to. Use
Yep.
a password in addition to a meeting ID. Use the waiting room if you can, and pay attention to who has what permissions. Very short and adequate for many Zoom applications. However, these are not the defaults. Good point. Keep in mind that Zoom is popular for business, not security reasons. For
Yeah.
sensitive applications, choose more mature, if more expensive, solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah. I mean,
link.
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that is true. That is true. And that goes, a lot of that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, and, and thinking about how, if you are running the live meeting, how do you run that in a way where no one has access, right? To no one has access, or you limit access to who is speaking. You are able to remove people. You are limiting access to who is actually coming in. And if needed, you can remove people. Yeah. So definitely. Anything else?
Yeah, hi, this is Dave. I don't know why my name comes up as board member. I'm not bored, but anyway, I just wanted to share with you those points. I'm a cybersecurity practitioner and also an involved member in the New York City Department of Ed in terms of working with our schools, our career technical education schools. But some of the things I've done in the past, and I don't know at what level you all are technically, but one of the first steps before we jumped into this advanced pool of applications are learning for your children is learning how to use the parental controls. I don't know how many have a device, and maybe if you have Verizon, have you checked out the ability to really limit and observe what's going on with your children? If you really want to get down to the letters, you can sign on for an app that will monitor any kind of text and chat sessions. As I say, a good rule of thumb is you have privacy up to a point where I need to be concerned. That's my basic rule, And although maybe your child is good at obeying and discipline, I mean, when my daughter was in school, I had to shut things down from 10 o'clock until 7 in the morning because, I don't know, some kids are up at all hours doing things, and I don't know where their parents are, but they probably are clueless as to what their children are doing. So those things are, something to look into, and they're all different, whether you're using, Verizon or Spectrum or, another provider. The same thing with the phones. Apple will gladly help. I'm not a Samsung user, so I can't talk to Androids, but Apple's pretty good. They're really, really good at trying to help you with that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Dave. Yeah, I think those are definitely, if a parent chooses to do that, they can definitely do that. Yeah, for sure. I think that can make it more challenging for a teacher that's thinking kind of more in a classroom environment around different tools and keeping children safe there as well. But if a parent were to choose to do that, I think parental controls are extremely important for sure, without a doubt, and enabling them really on whatever tools that you can.
It really becomes problematic if your kids are gamers and they're using these games where they're online actively with people known and unknown. I work with the FBI, and the last talk I gave had to do with human trafficking, and more particular extortion, which has gone from the business level. It's actually gone down into the adolescence, where they try to entrap kids into doing things, and then once they've got something on them, then they have them to encourage other activities, obviously illegal and immoral. But any parent, I think, if you observe your child's behavior and you see things that aren't right, they're withdrawing, a lot of behavioral changes, those are red flags that you really need to either consult with, I don't know how we consult now in this virtual society, pick up the phone, call your pediatrician or call a guidance counselor at the schools. They're maybe still available. I don't know, but don't let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nope. Yep. Good. Yeah. Well, you missed the part. I don't know if you were on. We were actually talking about the Department of Education, and then going from kind of switching back and forth to what webinar platform they're using. So you said you're with the Department of Education?
No, I work with. I'm a industry advisory board, so I work with the high schools to get the students internships because they need to get some work-based learning. And I know New York City has just come out, and I'm really surprised they jumped on it right away and removed Zoom from their platform. Most New York City schools are Google Classrooms. You know, and Google has their Hangouts. I don't know how it's used in the education arena, along with a lot of other apps out there. But I was just really surprised that they jumped on it and restricted it for use.
Well, they were actually told they're not allowed to use Google Classrooms either because it's not a Microsoft platform. So right now they have nothing. I think, Leah, I don't know if you're in it firsthand. I just spoke to my old boss, but sounds like this is a tough week for you guys.
Yeah, no. The Department of the New York Attorney General is involved with her investigation, but overall, just also because I live in New York City and have looked into doing work, cybersecurity work with the city. So their cybersecurity regulations are actually quite tight, and they're quite stringent. And so I think part of the question is particularly for something like Zoom, particularly because it just happened so quickly, how did this happen in the first place without there even being proper vetting? And this kind of really goes back to a lot of the platforms are, some platforms they're fine. They just need to be utilized in the right way, right? And so we can say that there are some specific issues with Zoom, particularly privacy, if they happen to be selling any information to Facebook, and this what was going on with them, and also LinkedIn, which they've stopped in terms of the sharing of information. But for New York itself, they do have a very high bar for security, and these to the point of policies and procedures that we talked about before around systems, they definitely have that in place here. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, particularly within the Department of Education here. Yeah. So, but we are at time. We do want to be respectful of everyone, and I just want to say thank you all so much for being on the call, and thank you, Shayna. Thank you for just sharing your brilliance, and all of you for sharing and adding so much value to this conversation. Zoe, do we have any last minute questions that have come up in the chat that I think could be good to just cover? Because I want to make sure that we do as much as possible.
We had covered them all. Great time.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh,
good. So again, thank you all so much. We are having other conversations like this in the future. Again, we've had 4 already focused strictly on business and businesses, which has been great and helpful for that segment. But at the end of the day, as we mentioned, people are human beings, and so they have other security concerns in their life, and so we want to be able to help meet them where they are. So I look forward to sharing other conversations that we'll be having in the future with you. And I have a feeling, Shayna, that we may come back and have like a part 2 of this, because I think there's I feel like there are other topics that we haven't even touched on yet. I think this can be very interesting, particularly when we think about really the role of students, but also this shared responsibility model between administrators, teachers, and parents. And how do we really make this work in this new environment?
Yep.
So,
yeah. To be continued.
To be continued. But I just, again, thank you all so much. And
thank you.
If any of you would like a copy of this webinar, just let me know, and we can make sure that you have it available to you. We have had a couple of people ask already, and so we are going to make it available to them as well.
Great.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Awesome. I'll get the recording.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Okay, great. You're